Hello and welcome to the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. We bring you interviews from people who have conquered the trickiest of health challenges using the functional diagnostic nutrition philosophy and similar healing modalities. You're going to hear from experts who have been through the ringer with their health issues and yet managed to come out on the other side. You can always visit us at functionaldiagnosticnutrition.com, but for now, here is today's episode. All right. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 382 of the Health Detective Podcast. We're moving right along. We got some cool announcements for episode 400, but you will not get to see those until episode 400. The only announcement I have today prior to us getting to this interview is something that you're going to hear about until probably February 1st at the very latest. And that is our second FDN conference that is not an actual FDN conference, but we're the main sponsor. I'll explain. So in October of this year, Reed had a smart idea and said, well, wait, instead of us hosting conferences, which is, a ton of resources, we got to basically put the whole team onto doing that. And then that could unfortunately affect the things that we do best, right? Marketing the course, getting you guys delivered on the course, and then getting you trained to become practitioners. He realized we can sponsor someone else's conference. Now our FDNs get to mix and mingle with a bunch of other new people. And in addition, we get to all, hang out as FDNs. So we are officially sponsoring the Biohacker Expo in Miami, Florida, Friday, February 28th and March 1st of 2025. And we are expecting about over 100 FDNs there. We're over 10% of the way to our sales goal within the first week. So we are so excited to see you guys. And I keep forgetting that does not count the staff members that are coming down. So really, we're over 15 to 20% of the way there. Reed will be there. Elizabeth Gaines, our education director, will be there on the keynote stage. I'll be there for whatever that's worth to you. Hopefully that's worth something. We have both a keynote slot and an actual 90-minute business workshop that we're going to be doing that's available to anyone at the conference, but also you guys as FDN. So if you're just about to graduate, or maybe you did graduate and you're struggling with that stuff, that's something that's included in the conference. The code is HDP at checkout, biohackerexpo.com, code HDP at checkout, like Health Detective Podcast. And since we are the largest sponsor, Sandy Martin, who is the host of that conference, was nice enough to give us 50% off tickets. So it is $600 almost to the general public. It is $297 for our FDNs. We will love to see you guys there. If you've never really done a health conference before, we highly encourage you to come. It's so much fun to get to meet the other black sheep of each person's family, right? You're the one that went through the lab test and eats weird. When you go to a conference like this, it is par for the course. So I think there's about 15 or 1,600 people expected to be there, and we hope to see you guys there. Our guest today is someone that is not an FDN, but he's very similar to us in the sense of what he likes to study and how he helps people. So I thought he'd be a great guest for the show. Since 2005, Marek has worked or is a functional nutritional therapist, based in London, and has been doing this for a while now, about 19 years. And he now combines this with breathwork. He works one-on-one with clients and provides mentoring for practitioners, both in London and online. He focuses heavily on the personalized approach, who will benefit, not what is effective. I love that. That's very similar to us. And on steps, nutritional or otherwise, needed to enter a healing state. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today. HRV and organic acids testing are going to be two of the main ones. And we might even get to share some test results. So Marek, welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
All right, so let's start with your own personal health journey. I know that obviously you help clients, but one of the things that we ask before we have the individual come on is if they had a personal health story. And even after 380 something episodes, 99% of the people that are in this space usually have something first that kind of inspires them or something that they've dealt with themselves. So to the degree that you're willing to share, may I ask, what were your first health symptoms and what did they look like?
Well, yeah, so I generally had a very convenient setup. I didn't have to ever experience anything like insomnia until the day that I did. So 27 years old, and yeah, it had always been such a gift to pretty much just sleep whenever I so wished. If I had half an hour between appointments and had been out a little bit late the night before, then I'd just set my alarm for 27 minutes and wake up super fresh. And then one night, which came after I'd had 2 hits on my spine in the same week and was also living in a moldy flat, I just couldn't get to sleep. And I thought, oh, so this is what people talk about when they talk about insomnia. But so that's pretty much the driver, and things really mounted from then. I was already very much deep in the nutrition world, functional nutrition at that point. And I mean, it's fair to say that it was the worst type of education, but super valuable education, and demonstrated that actually a lot of the things that I was putting into place, sure, I knew that they worked because I was watching them work on a daily basis, but they weren't working for me, which of course is the real spur towards going deeper and looking at, okay, how can we know what each individual needs? So again, not what is good, I already knew that, but when is something going to be good? Who is it going to work in? And of course, they say a lot of research is me search, and I didn't buck any trends there, but that really was a huge motivating factor to dig deep into, what is stopping my nervous system from doing something that it was doing with such ease for so long. So it wasn't an overnight thing, but pleased to say that I did learn something from it.
So then tell me this, I'd love to know what even sparked your interest in, even if it wasn't the education that you wanted, the nutrition side and all that stuff, because 2005, I mean, that's impressive. This space is still, to me, maybe not nutrition, but this functional space is very new. I think a lot of people still have no idea the stuff that you and I have the privilege of getting to learn and discuss and talk about on a daily basis. So then you go back almost 20 years and you think, okay, what was going on? So were you just always someone that had a general interest in this and now it's evolved into this more functional side?
Yeah, very much so. So right at the start, I was mainly focused on strength and conditioning. So some professional athletes, lots of semi-pro athletes, and a fair few weekend warriors. And I guess like everything, you get to nail one area quite early on. And for me, it was fat loss. And so, I could get my macros dialed in beautiful way. And sure enough, athlete after athlete, we would essentially just choose what weight we wanted to put them at. Perfect. And then I started to get a few athletes that weren't responding, and there was these patterns within there. At the same time, the word of mouth works out the way it is. Turns out fat loss is quite the crowd pleaser. And so, a lot of regular human beings were coming along, and that was interesting because straight away, it turns out that athletes aren't regular human beings. And the humans that we interact with on a more daily basis, it was a much more mixed response. Some were still getting great results, pleasing, others weren't. So already I was looking into the role of hormones, and certainly early on adrenal function was something that I started to spot very, very quickly. And sure enough, you took your 100 people that weren't responding, and about half of them would actually suddenly start getting results. Still left another half that weren't. So again, it was a case of looking deeper and deeper, and of course, confronting the limitations of what was already a decent model. But when I'm getting emails from people telling me how wonderful results they've got, but I can't get to sleep, that was annoying. There was already a very clear example of the need to go deeper. But this is where crunching the data, tracking all the outcomes, looking at, what will give us a valuable predictive marker for who's going to respond, who's not going to respond. And more importantly, when we see that, what's actually going to be necessary in order to get the response that we're after. And so here we are, 3,500 clients later and 13,500 test results. And it starts to take on a very different pattern now. Because yes, as soon as certain patterns become obvious, you see them again and again and again. And as soon as the questions that I was asking those individuals when we started to delineate these patterns, as soon as they started to yield fruit, again, start to get a bit of a pattern and allow a platform for the individuals to just tell me what they need. And of course, case history combined with the organic acid test, combined with the heart rate variability. That's often what I start with. I'll do a whole lot more than just that. But at the start, that gives us so much.
And that's what we're going to dive into next. I only have actually one other question before that. It's because I'm so obsessed with people's stories. I love knowing how they get into this space. So one thing that I'm curious about is, so you started out into the strength and conditioning. That's actually a very common theme. So many people that have become FDNs or come onto this show, they start with this natural interest in fitness and health, and then something stops working, and that's when they get curious. But what I have a lot of respect for individuals like yourself and the other individuals on the show who've done something similar is, how did you allow yourself to get curious enough to start learning about alternative methods as opposed to just and I'm not, listen, I don't want to, name any names here, but I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of influencers and other people, they almost just gaslight their clients. Like, if they see that something's not working for the client, they don't get curious. What they do is say, you must not be complying and you're not doing it behind closed doors. So what was the influence that allowed you to become curious and not dismiss your clients, but instead say, I'm going to become even better so that I can help them?
Well, I always felt like it was quite clear who was complying, and sometimes it was clear who wasn't. If I had second, third, fourth follow-up appointment with people, and this is going back to the very early days, I didn't have the tracking systems in place that I have now. But you could tell the real despair that people would have when they really put their heart and soul into something, and they couldn't have tried anymore. They couldn't have followed it any closer. There was always the times when I would do the measurements. We'd see what was up and how things had improved, get a good idea of the headline changes, and maybe there wasn't any, and then people would have that knowing expression that makes sense. To be fair, I've been a little slack on things, so be it. But it was clear that there were so many people that they couldn't be any more committed, and it's a horrible thing to have provided people with the best recommendations that I can, and for them to follow them to within an inch of their life, and them not seeing the results that they deserve. And it was so clear that something was stopping them, because a lot of the time these would have been recommendations that had worked so incredibly well for the person I'd spoken to a couple of hours before. So there had to be answers. And sure enough, a lot of them end up sounding so obvious when you add another 15 years into that process. But as you say, there wasn't the structured thought process. There wasn't the principles available that we still don't see utilized in the main, but they are available. People can find ideas. They can connect with people that have been there, have watched what works, when it doesn't work, and actually come away with an understanding of the process. And that wasn't necessarily so available then. There was a little bit of trial and error. There was a little bit of, do what Charles Poliquin tells you to do. That that was 2005. It was a different time. And so, yeah, it's a case of recognizing straight away there's not a right way and a wrong way. There's no things that are good. There are things that have a high likelihood of working, provided that is what's holding the individual back. And so finding the methods to actually assess and quickly identify, well, what is the obstacle in this given individual? Suddenly, it does make this work. Simple in principle. Still humans involved. There's still the complexity of the human metabolism, but the principles are always simple.
I really respect that mindset. I wish more people, from practitioners to doctors, had this idea that, yes, when my client or patient or whoever's coming in, and especially if you're seeing a pattern, maybe we just learn to just get a little bit more curious, because I feel like I'm already getting your vibe after 15 minutes of this. I'm like, all right, this is just, a genuinely good dude who's intellectually curious. And so to you, it's obvious, but I feel like all the time, especially in America, there's plenty of medical gaslighting and things that go on where the assumption is that if we told you to do something and you do it and it doesn't work, the problem must be with you and something that you did or didn't do, as opposed to maybe we're missing something. And obviously then you've worked with thousands of clients, like you mentioned, 3,500, over 3,500. And you said that you do offer more than this if they need it, but the things that you start with are HRV and the organic acids test. This is one of my favorite parts of the show, because we get these practitioners on who are all amazing people and they all get great results for their clients, and yet they all kind of have their own little thing that they found that works for them. And I've never heard someone get on here yet and use those two things as their foundationals. Now, HRV is very well studied and documented, so that makes a lot of sense to me intuitively, but I'm kind of curious, why did you conclude that these are the two things that you're going to start with every client? Again, you might offer more if they need it, but you start with this. Why did you come up with those two as the things to start with?
So I think the easiest way is because it allows me to predict the future. I mean, the things that people want to know, especially the type of clients that I tend to work with, which these days is 80% of the complex chronic cases, those that have really been around the block. They've been passed from specialist to specialist, and they've often been given shrugs, or as you say, well, this is an effective medication. So, whereas actually all that's happened is it's been shown to have a statistically significant benefit when given to one group versus placebo, but maybe only 1 in 8 responded. That's actually what happens with SSRIs, the single most popular drug prescribed in the world. 7 out of 8 people do not respond to it, but hey, 1 in 8 does. Statistically significant improvement. It's evidence-based, even though it's mathematically guaranteed to let down the majority of people that take it. But I digress. These are the individuals, they might have been given an S or a D, a syndrome or a disorder, which basically means nothing other than, hey, we see a lot of people with the exact same problems. And we couldn't help them either, but have a label, good luck. So that's often the individuals that I work with most commonly. And so a lot of them just don't respond to anything. And so that's obviously really disheartening in itself. And it's really useful to be able to have 75 different markers in one test. That's the organic acids test, because believe it or not, there's never once been a case where I've had an organic acids test and said, oh, there's absolutely 0 obstacles anywhere in any of those zones that are tested. There's always something, no matter how good somebody feels, no matter how awful somebody feels, we're going to come away with a number of action points. But I think just as importantly is actually recognizing the context in which these blockages or obstacles or burdens are occurring. And this is where heart rate variability, when interpreted appropriately, is actually going to be such a useful thing. 2 examples I'll give there. If somebody feels awful, they got brain fog, slow digestion, a whole number of mystery symptoms, and they are sensitive to everything, it turns out there's very few things they can take and they don't respond badly to it. Well, I can then take a look at their heart rate variability, and maybe they will show this extremely high heart rate variability, which of course, for anyone with the usual apps, they will see the readouts that are given to them each morning. Great job. Things are looking fantastic. But this is the problem with the heart rate variability apps. They operate on this black and white thinking. This is all of the apps that do it, by the way. There's not one versus the other, wherein sympathetic equals low heart rate variability equals stressed equals bad. Parasympathetic, well, that's the high heart rate variability. That's good. That's relaxed. But the key thing I want to stress when talking about this is that all that heart rate variability tells us is whether somebody is sympathetic and mobilized, low heart rate variability, or whether they are parasympathetic and demobilized. And that can be because they're in a state of rest and digest. Lovely, wonderful. Or it can be because they are in a state of parasympathetic stress, aka a freeze type stress response. So yeah, that's where the body can be demobilized because there's no need to scramble for energy. It's got everything it needs. Why does it want any more? Or because there's no point, because there's such a big gap between what it's got and what it needs that no human stress response is going to bridge that gap. So it chooses the hibernation, the playing dead, the waiting until times change. So this is really key because so many people will end up with these high heart rate variability measures, even though they are categorically not in heart rate and in rest and digest. They're clearly suffering with a whole myriad of different symptoms and problems. They're slow, they're foggy, they really don't feel good at all. Now, what happens if we improve their energy security? What if we take away some mitochondrial blockages? They go from having this huge, excessive gap between what they've got and what they need, and suddenly it's a big gap, but it's just about bridgeable, and they will mobilize. Their system no longer sees the need to play dead. It can go back to its preferred stress response, the fight and flight. And suddenly, yeah, their brain works a little bit more. They've got a bit of capacity. They can move a bit. But what happens that night? They're going to potentially struggle to get to sleep. Some people get tension instead, which if it's in the neck means headaches. If it's in the gut means all sorts of bloating and disturbances. If it's, in different zones of the body, you can get different unexplained symptoms. But come what may, what we can do there is we can see where they are at. What is their nervous system doing with their energy? I can look at their case history and see, has there been any history of these types of problems before? How does their system respond? And that way I can say, okay, I can clearly see very clear signs of a particularly profound shortage of B1. So I'm going to correct that, but I'm going to do it slowly because I expect to see your system mobilize. This is not you being sensitive to B1. This is not a bad reaction. This is simply your system coming out of a freeze. It's switching on circuitry. It's switching on permission to invest energy in various different pathways. And that could be the gut. It could be the immune system. Most importantly, various pathways in the central nervous system. And we want that, but it will also include circuitry that is leading into the alarm centers. So yeah, it can need management, but there's such a big difference for me to look at the organic acid test, say, hey, you need B1 and you need 3 or 4 other things, here you go, versus actually using this amazing and simple and cheap tool we've got, heart rate variability, in order to recognize not only where are they at, but also to allow them to see quantifiable evidence that exactly what we expected to see is exactly what we are seeing. It makes sense. And it means that they needn't have that dilemma of, oh my goodness, is this going to be another one of those issues where I have insomnia for another month? And instead they can recognize, okay, I was told this is going to happen. Here was the options that were put to one side, ready specifically for these challenges. So yeah, it means we can anticipate problems before they begin. Equally, we can use heart rate variability to see, is somebody going from long-term sympathetic dominance, let's say the finance types, they are super efficient, they're super productive and have been for decades, but their system's being worn out because no human body can actually tolerate that long term. Well, what happens when they come down? Well, suddenly, they're in rest and digest for the first time. They'll feel tired. They'll be hungry. Rest and digest. And this is where, to be able to tell somebody, okay, this is what you can anticipate. This is not, your brain stopping working. This is just you without adrenaline. So we can see, what are these things going to do? How is that going to play out? And so, that's why between a case history, organic acids test, and heart rate variability, we can get a great grasp of how these issues are affecting people. Organic acids test tells us why they're affecting people. Heart rate variability, providing it's put into context, allows us to predict, okay, how is that going to change how the nervous system invests that energy, what activity it actually now permits that wasn't happening before, and thus we can predict the future.
That's awesome. I like your emphasis too with the case history mattering, because for us as FDNs, our founder Reed Davis always says we never, ever, ever treat the paperwork. We address the person. So the paperwork does matter. The labs matter. That's why we use them, right? But it matters in relationship to the human being that's in front of me. One thing I wanted to get clarity on, and I apologize if I just didn't follow. So, I have an Oura ring, for example. I think it's cool to use. I take it with a grain of salt for many things. I have noticed I would say that the readiness score, for whatever reason, works very well for me. I would say that predicts it accurately. I can tell that I'm able to do more. This is very funny. Because I don't know if you guys have this as much over there. Maybe you've heard of it. Do you know pickleball, like the mini version of?
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a phenomenon for your side of the pond, but I do have enough American clients that I have become familiar with pickleball.
Yes. So unfortunately, they got me with it. It's very fun. It's up and coming here for sure. But I've noticed, and it was accidental, so I know it's not a bias. This is what was crazy. I started to notice that the readiness scores, if I didn't sleep well or whatever happened, and I was below 80 versus when I'm above 90. Now, I'm not saying that's a perfect prediction on the app, but whatever they're doing correlates perfectly with my accuracy of shots. So I'll start to notice if I'm 90 and above, I'll have one of those days where I'm just like, I was just on today. It's like, I can't miss, I'm getting everything. But, that 80 and below, I'll start to feel like, man, I'm missing such easy shots. So it's weird because you think about, well, what would actually be happening? It could be a little millisecond that my brain's off, but just being off that small frame of time is the reason that I'm hitting it into the net versus hitting it over. So I'm sorry for my pickleball tangent. The whole point of my question was, do you have an issue with the way that they measure HRV, or do you have an issue with the way that they conclude what your HRV means? Are these actually accurate for HRV? Because I have heard mixed reviews with that.
So for heart rate variability, it is very, very accurate technology. Okay. So there is definitely some level of accuracy, which makes it useful, but not perfectly reliable when it comes to sleep, particularly the type of sleep that you're in, deep sleep versus REM. But again, we can almost always use common sense. So we can see, okay, in Aaron, he always feels better on those days when the ring said he got an hour and a half of deep sleep versus, say, 45 minutes. That is a perfectly reliable metric in him. But in Abigail, doesn't work that way. Okay, so that's not going to be a useful metric, because potentially her individual characteristics, whether it's the temperature of her finger that's being measured, the exact pulse rate, the breath rate. There's always that space whereby for a lot of people, the sleep data is reliable. For some people, it doesn't quite work out that way. But in the main, the heart rate variability data is always accurate. The one issue that I pick with it is for those individuals, and this is generally those individuals who feel particularly bad, have been on a health journey for a long time. They've seen 7, 8, 9 or more different practitioners. These are the individuals that are almost always, not always, but almost always in that state of parasympathetic stress. Their system is saying, we haven't got the energy to fight or run anymore. We need to turn to that alternative stress response, the playing dead, the hibernation, the freezing. And so they end up with particularly high heart rate variability because they're in a state of strong parasympathetic dominance. But it's not the parasympathetic dominance that we would generally look for, which is that rest and digest state, which is a state of relaxation. It's a state where you're demobilized because you don't need any more energy. This is a state where you're demobilized because the system says there's no benefit in trying to find it. We're never going to be able to bridge the gap because instead of having a X amount of energy and wanting more, sympathetic stress response will bridge that easily. Your body mobilizes, your heart rate variability drops, but your system's doing what it's designed to do, covering the gaps, finding that energy, dumping sugars into the bloodstream. Great, you can run away from the tiger, whatever you need to do. But when the energy is so low and the needs are so high, for example, the alarm centers are picking up on signals that they interpret as a need to get ready, a sign of impending disaster. That is where we'll see the system collapse into the parasympathetic. So that's what I mean about contextualizing the heart rate variability. For a lot of people who are feeling great, a lot of athletes, it will generally be totally accurate. They can really tune into the feedback they get. So what I'm referring to is specifically those individuals in that state of parasympathetic stress, whereby their system has turned off all investment into non-emergency tasks, gut, healing, prefrontal cortex, all of the rest of it. Not only do they feel as bad as you'd expect in those circumstances, they also have this parasympathetic stress response to go with it. High heart rate variability. And in those circumstances, the app says, wonderful, things are looking good. That's the minutiae there. For a lot of people, it will be perfectly accurate.
Very cool. Thank you. And you know what's cool about the apps too is even if everything's not perfect yet, and they continue to make improvements, right? The Oura Ring 4 just came out. Like, I think you and I would both probably believe this, but for the audience members that don't understand yet, it's because the stuff that we're inventing, it's not a matter of like if this is going to be something that's just incredible one day. It's just when, like how long will it take us to get there? These stupid rings, we're going to be able to wear this stuff and get more data than you could possibly imagine. And it's going to be accurate. It's just a matter of time before we get there. I think one of the important things now that's still very useful is even if, am I going to bet my life on the readiness score interpretation, the sleep stages, or the HRV? Probably not bet my life on it. But if I wear this long enough, the apps and the system itself starts to learn my body and so can start to notice relative changes. One of the things that I had noticed is, unfortunately, I was exposed to mold for about a year straight in an apartment. I had no idea that it was happening. And I guess thankfully, because I was healthy going into it, it took a while to really beat me down. So it was a very progressive thing. But then it got to the point I couldn't ignore it. So I ended up pulling the trigger and buying the Oura Ring, not because I didn't already think that they were cool, but I bought it because what actually ended up happening, Marek, is my sinuses were getting so clogged at night when I was sleeping because it was in the vents and I was turning my air down because I was trying to sleep cold. So I'm trying to do the right thing for my health. And yeah, it was actually making it worse. My nose would get so congested. The last 2 weeks that we were at this apartment, I'd start to like gasp for breath while sleeping, and I'd wake up because of this. It was very scary. So I bought this to actually track the oxygen sensor. I wanted to test for any disturbances at night. Sure enough, not only were there disturbances at night, my HRV was tanked. And it's, thank God, been a year and 2 months since we've been out of there. And I've watched it slowly and steadily climb back up to a healthier place. So even if the number wasn't perfectly accurate, I do know now that this is attuned to me, and it does know when things are going awry. So I can say, yes, I feel good right now. I feel healthy. I can speak clearly enough, and I'm using the right words, which I wasn't a year ago. It was kind of scary. And the ring does seem to correlate with that. Robin had asked, and I'm sorry, Robin, because I did miss this for a few minutes. She said, what about a very low HRV? And I think you had actually kind of touched on that, but is there anything else you wanted to add to what?
Yeah, so very low heart rate variability, that will always be a reliable sign that the system is heavily mobilized. It's a sympathetic dominance, a sympathetic stress response, which we often use the term fight and flight response. So what's interesting there is that I will see some individuals with particularly low heart rate variability. It's their overnight averages are in the 20s. We know that this is an individual who's very, very stressed. Occasionally even lower than that. And this is where it's fascinating to see that if this has been a long-term thing, these individuals just will feel normal, because whatever's normal for us is normal for us. And this is often whereby we may see fantastic top-down regulation, which is where certain parts of our prefrontal cortex directly inhibit the amygdala from firing more fully, and thus we don't feel too bad, unless of course we have a temporary disruption in our energy supply, for example, which is what happened in my case in 2012. And now there wasn't enough excess energy in this particularly energy intensive zone to do that constant round the clock inhibition, and all hell broke loose. And I wouldn't have said that I was stressed at the time. Obviously, in hindsight and doing a whole lot of nervous system work, it seems that the opposite was true. But that's where having the heart rate variability can be so useful in order to give people a bit of quantitative feedback to let us know, okay, there is a huge problem here wherein the stress response is locked on. We need to work out why that is. Now, maybe that's to do with energy availability or a lack thereof. Maybe the mitochondria aren't producing enough energy. Maybe the energy signaling isn't going the way we want. That's insulin, thyroid, leptin, or maybe there's theft of energy, immune system, inflammation, activated immune cells, so energy thirsty. Or maybe there's issues with perceived energy demands. I mean, it could be actual energy demands because you're working a 16-hour day. And if somebody says, yeah, but I've always done that and it doesn't affect me. Well, that will be because there's no contrast between being on or off. That individual is always on. So yeah, it can be that there's just too much demand. It could also be that there's poor cortisol activity, whether there's production issues or more commonly issues with receptor sensitivity. Well, that's no longer going to be able to tell the nervous system that, hey, the body's responded, we've got the resources, we've done our bit, you can now turn off. Because most people always talk about cortisol as the stress hormone when it actually has a very potent anti-stress effect in turning down the acute stress response. It helps the body cope with stress. So that can actually leave the system receiving signals that indicate we still need to deal with this. We still need to do some adaptation. And then, of course, there's the big one. Is there overactive response from either the amygdala or the brainstem? These alarm centers that evolution has rewarded to act quickly rather than accurately. And if they detect anything that they associate with some event where there was a need for readiness, there was a need for action, there was something that needed avoiding. Well, this is super common. It's more a case of to what extent is that playing a role in individuals rather than is it or not. And that's where, the nervous system work, be that somatic work, breath work, or other avenues, they work to essentially prove to those alarm systems through experiencing and moving those sensory signals through that actually these signals are not a need for readiness, and thus the energy needs drop. And ultimately, this is where everybody we work with who has low heart rate variability, anybody whose system is suffering from stress, what is stress? It's energy security. It is any scenario where the need for energy outweighs the energy that is available. And so if we can increase the energy availability, we can reduce the energy needs, there is no longer any stress. And suddenly the system can do what it always had the capacity to do, which is heal itself. And that's always the case. But do we ever actually reach that point in many people where they have that fair chance? No is the answer. But this is where the principles, as I touched on right at the start, they're the same for everyone, but exactly what section that needs most attention, or sections, plural, that's obviously going to vary. And that's where that case history, the organic acids tests, and the heart rate variability just gives us such a great start. And sure, there's always going to be some value in other testing. Once we've started to reduce the noise, we've started to see individual patterns emerge. Absolutely, yes, let's use further testing. But as a starting option, I'm very, very happy with what that can tell us.
Awesome. So let's, I can definitely do an extra 5 minutes so let's spend the last 10 to 15 minutes giving you guys a little bonus here. So we already have lab test results for the organic acids test waiting in our little private room here. And if I will, I'll share them because, again, our audience, there's pretty much nothing they love more than this. Let me rearrange our faces here too. That makes it a bit easier to see. Guys, this is not to be mistaken with our lab and learns that we sometimes do it without in the month. Like, it's more just sharing results because I know that you guys like them. But it'd be cool, Marek, you really, since the time's somewhat limited, again, we have about 10, 15 minutes. This is up to you how you want to present this. We could take it from the approach of, hey, this XYZ client, this is what we're seeing here generally. You could go over some of your favorite markers. It's really up to you.
Okay, well, there's obviously no possibility we're going to be able to do the organic acids test justice in that short period of time. But what I would love to do is to just touch on, an example of how useful it can be. So, we've given a pseudonym to this client, but she came in, as I previously touched on, very much within that type of journey where she's been passed from pillar to post, chronic fatigue, mast cell issues. So, we know that we're going to be looking for energy issues. We know we're going to be looking for inflammatory issues. But let me just touch on some of the things that we can see on here. Now, for those viewers with big enough screens, you may well be able to see the numbers here. Number 28 is a marker called aconitic acid, and you'll see that marker is low. Now, this, I would say, is probably the single most telling result that we will see out of all the markers. It's amazing the predictive value that this has, especially in individuals that have any issues relating to energy. This is an organic acid produced by an enzyme called aconitase. Why is that important? Because that enzyme is super sensitive to a lack of oxygen. There are occasionally some caveats where we can see this pattern mimicked, but in the main, this is a very reliable marker for a lack of oxygen in the mitochondria. There is no other substance that's going to be as important for effective energy production. So I cannot overstate the importance of this. And this can sometimes be caused by anemia. This can sometimes relate to hydrogen sulfide, bacterial overgrowth in the small intestines. Hydrogen sulfide competes with oxygen. It can also be caused by mold and the inflammatory impact that it has on the capillaries that would otherwise deliver oxygen to the cells. So these are important things to screen for, as we touched on that case history. But the single most common pattern that we're going to see here is stress-induced endotoxemia. And what I'm talking about there is, what happens in a stress response? What is its purpose? It's to open up the gut lining to grab more sugars and salts. Now, it's doing that alongside liberating sugars and fats from storage. It's also disinvesting in non-emergency tasks to divert that energy elsewhere. But this really pivotal function of grabbing more sugars and salts from the gut, great, it's a very effective strategy. We get those resources, but in doing so, we're also going to allow little fragments of dead bacteria, aka endotoxins, aka lipopolysaccharides. Well, now they can enter the bloodstream and they can't cause an infection. They're just fragments left over from bacteria that are no longer alive. But they can cause all manner of inflammatory chaos. They can downregulate your cortisol receptors and other steroid hormone receptors. But we're likely to see a very characteristic type of immune response to this. And this is one that pumps out a ton of nitric oxide. We often hear about the benefits of nitric oxide. And when this is produced in the endothelium, our blood vessels, through the enzyme endothelial nitric oxide synthase, well, that's just great. But when it's produced by the immune system, inducible nitric oxide synthase forms it in the wrong places. And this includes the mitochondria. And this is where you're going to get a ton of nitric oxide competing with the oxygen. So often people will have no anemia, no mold issues, none of the hydrogen sulfide issues that I mentioned. There shouldn't be any issues with the oxygen availability at the cells. And yet there is going to be this devastating issue with oxygen availability where it really, really counts. And so classically, as per this individual that we're looking at these results, there's so many things that she's trialed from your standard primary physician prescribed medications for sleep, for depression. She's gone to the various alternative practitioners who've given her various different mitochondrial packs, but none of them ever had a fair chance. And herein we immediately see what's what. And I must say, in the chronic complex cases, about 70% of them will show this marker. And this is such a big deal because, we absolutely need this in order to, we need the oxygen in order to be able to make energy effectively. And if you can't, well, how's the brain going to function? That's one of the most energy intensive zones that we're ever going to encounter. How do we expect to detoxify effectively? Our system is going to be in this constant scramble for the energy that it needs. And that's where all the disinvestment symptoms come along as well. Now, just to sort of complete this one marker, often we're looking at adrenal support, because these endotoxins reduce cortisol sensitivity. Cortisol would normally reduce inflammation, especially this nitric oxide driven type of inflammation that I speak of. It's no longer able to do that. It would also turn off the stress response that's actually driving that opening of the gut lining. So it's absolutely vital. We also might want to take a look at steps to calm the signaling into those alarm centers, and especially nervous system work, what might need to be undertaken, be that breath work or otherwise, to just bring the system down. But we can also look at supporting the mitochondria itself, whether that's through antioxidants, whether that's looking at iron status, which can, if it gets out of hand, can have a devastating effect on the way our systems access and use oxygen. red light, copper status. So there's a number of things that we can really take a look into there. So I could go on, but I thought I should probably breathe for a second and check in on any questions you have on that.
Well, what I thought it was really interesting that that marker was off 70% of the time in those, at least in your experience, but you've worked with a heck of a lot of people.
Yeah.
So to be clear, you've worked with over 3,500 people, but I don't know if you even have the answer to this. Roughly how many people, when you're saying that 70%, how many people have run an organic acids test with you? Is it the same amount?
So as of about 2015, that's when it was a case of, right, this is what I'm doing with everybody. But yeah, naturally, because of the nature of follow-up testing, etc. Yeah, we're up to about 5,000.
It's a lot of people.
It is an awful lot, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking here what might be the best, and I apologize for not having thought this through better myself. This is actually rare that this happens. There might be a great opportunity here for us to do some type of part 2 where we just focus on the organic acids together. That might be fun.
I love talking about the organic acids.
I was about to say, that would fit in so well. The one thing I did want to ask, though, beforehand, just for those that aren't too familiar with this test, the way that this test displays the data is a percentile based type of thing, right? So what's really kind of fun about the organic acids, well, I shouldn't say fun. It's fun if you're people like us. What's fun about the organic acids test is you kind of almost need to think critically about what you're looking at, because there's very few markers on here that it's like, oh, this definitively means this. You always kind of have to look in the context of the person. Even like the bacterial and the fungi markers, for example, there's things that are associated with Candida, but it's not necessarily a diagnostic Candida test. It's something that you have to use, your kind of clinical correlation and investigation for. So I just wanted people to know that, but I think that's kind of a cool part about the test is it does take a well-versed practitioner to be able to utilize these things and really get the most out of it.
I couldn't agree more with that. And yeah, in terms of context, it's one other thing we could pick from this particular test. And of course, maybe we'll touch on others in part 2, but yeah, if viewers zone in on marker 33 and marker 34, that's homo-vanillic acid and vanil-mandelic acid, respectively. Now, these largely tell us where are we at with dopamine, where are we at with norepinephrine. So key thing here is if you were looking at this particular marker, you would say, whoa, this woman's got loads of dopamine, so she should be super motivated. She should be productive and her executive function should be on point. She should have none of these issues with concentration and sluggishness and finding that everything takes so much effort and she's just, struggling to get the basic functions out of her brain. Now, she was a classic low dopamine case. So this is where we look at this marker and we say, well, what's going on here? Now, this happens to be this paradoxical dopamine deficiency, wherein there is plenty of dopamine in the cell, but there's something blocking its conversion into the norepinephrine. And so it actually accumulates to such a large extent in the cell that now there's so much of it interacting with a very specific enzyme, monoamine oxidase. Dopamine is a monoamine, and monoamine oxidase oxidizes it. And that's where you get this mischievous chemical cousin of dopamine, hydroxydopamine, which just so happens to shut down the mitochondria of that cell. If that cell is a dopamine cell, it's not going to do its job anymore. It's not going to fire the dopamine. So there's tons available, but it's not firing. And so, this is a pattern. I wouldn't say it's awfully common, but it's certainly not rare. And this is where, we absolutely want to go about this in a totally different manner to how we would if there was just a raw, low dopamine state. This is important. We do not supply more precursors into the pathway, but instead looking at moving the dopamine into a part of the neuron called the vesicle. It's basically the gun that shoots the dopamine, but it can't be oxidized once it's in there. It's safe from this unwanted action. And we can also inhibit the enzyme itself. And things like canna or lithium orotate can help move it into that vesicle. Meanwhile, rhodiola, green tea, ginkgo biloba, these can be wonderful to actually avoid that unwanted oxidation. And so by taking a different approach, because we now know what we need to do, amazing difference. And that actually is one of the most useful examples of how having that organic acids test allows us to take what we already knew, classic case of low dopamine, but actually avoid, having to roll the dice. We can simply just methodically deal with this situation, and of course to be able to explain to an individual why things didn't work before with such clarity and confidence. That's also quite a valuable part of this process as well. It's not just having the answers, it's allowing people to recognize that it isn't hopeless, and it isn't that nothing works for them. It's just that they never had a fair chance, but now they do.
Right. Awesome. I can't wait to do this. Definitely is worthy of a part 2 with the test itself. Marek, though, where can people find you for those interested in working with you or learning more about you?
Okay, so my website is marekdoyle.com. So I've got plenty of articles on there if people are interested in this sort of thing, and also contact details if people want to get in touch. Instagram, Marek Doyle Nutrition, but also Substack, which is where my efforts are starting to lean towards, which is marekdoyle.substack.com.
Awesome. And then our final question on the show, this is the signature one that we do to wrap it up today. And this is just a general health question. If we could give you a magic wand, you could wave it and you could get all of our listeners and viewers to do one thing for their health. So that means that they could start doing one thing, or you can get us all to stop doing one thing. What is the one thing that you get us to do?
Oh. I would say that I would take the organic acids test and have it properly interpreted.
I can work with that. Thank you so much for coming on today. And thanks for sharing way more information about HRV than I thought we would get today. That's why I predicted it wrong. It's actually because you provided so much value. So we really appreciate you coming on.
Well, it's been great talking about these things. It is something that I find very interesting. I could talk all day, but I guess we'll